Welcome to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco, bringing you interviews with industry experts and regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land you job interviews in 60 days, guaranteed. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
Hi guys, I am delighted to have with me today on the Resume Storyteller podcast, career coach and corporate outplacement specialist, Matt Youngquist. He's a Seattle-based career coach and a LinkedIn expert who helps people to navigate today's uncharted employment waters. He is the founder and president of Career Horizons, where he consults with clients at all levels on how to strategically manage their careers, explore their occupational options, and market themselves successfully to new opportunities. In addition to coaching and resume writing, he provides corporate outplacement consulting to employers. And he has taught over 300 job search training seminars with writings that have appeared in the Seattle Times and Puget Sound Business Journal and many other top media outlets. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it, especially after last month. I had a calendar glitch and you were patient enough to come back on this month.
I think we've all been there, Virginia. Thanks so much for having me.
So you heard me give a quick overview of how you help job seekers. I am curious to know how you came to be in this role.
Yeah, it's sort of an ironic twist that, I spend my days teaching people how to be very proactive and purposeful and meaningful in their career exploration. And yet here I am in this field that I landed in totally by accident.
Accidental entrepreneur.
I was sort of a country bumpkin, grew up in Alaska. I came down to school, and when I got out of University of Washington, I, like most people, needed a job. And I rapidly realized I had no idea what I was doing. As luck would have it, ended up in a startup company in the early 90s that was doing executive career coaching. And I just came in as like a data entry, $5 an hour specialist and just worked my way up because I just became fascinated by the field. And to this day, I feel like the stuff you and I do, job hunt training and career coaching is this life skill that almost nobody ever gets any training in. And yet it's so hard way right now. But
right.
So yeah, stumbled in it by accident and have just, made my way in it for about 25 years now.
That is fascinating. It's so funny how people, come to this industry. I don't know that I know anyone who said, when I grow up, I want to be a career coach and a resume writer. Most of us didn't even realize that was a job. I know I didn't. So sort of shifting gears here, I know that you, as mentioned in the bio, you work with people all levels, lots of different industries. Do you feel like there are a couple of challenges facing them, regardless of the level, regardless of their industry, sort of challenges that are common to those that are job searching or trying to make a career pivot today?
Yeah, certainly a number of factors to have our eye on and be a little concerned about. And I think probably most of your listeners are well aware of these. But you've got things like automation, eating into a certain amount of jobs that have historically been available for real humans. You've got age bias, although, as you said, that doesn't affect all job hunters. I think some of the more concerning ones are things sort of the total lack of or dehumanization of the process, where a lot of people who haven't job hunted for a while get out there and they're just shocked at how little feedback. They send stuff into the black hole, never even get the famous pink postcard, thanks but no thanks, or even having friends or recruiters ghost them. I guess that's the new term. And I think that's a really sort of corrosive thing because, job hunters often their confidence, as you know, is already pretty fragile. And when they get so little feedback for all this effort, it just can send them in a tailspin. So that's one that a lot of my clients have been wrestling with.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to remember. I mean, I was job searching in 1990. Obviously, we didn't have ATS back then. I remember ghosting happening, but I don't know that I was aware that it was happening with all because I didn't have social media to know if other people were going through this. So it just makes it feel so much more in your face, I feel like. But I agree. Those are the challenges that I see as well.
I think one other one I'd throw in is just the inflation of job requirements, where I think there was much more of a tendency in the older days for companies to hire on potential or to provide some training. And I think companies are, kind of acting like, I'll speak for myself, but consumers. We've all become very spoiled with this new economy, and they want sort of instant plug and play. So a lot of my folks will look at job descriptions and go, geez, I thought I was pretty marketable and I can't, who's got all this stuff? Who's got all these plus speaks Vietnamese and is left-handed?
I call them unicorn.
And it's an entry-level job.
Unicorn job posts. They don't really
That's another one that's...
Do you recommend that people apply when they have is there a certain threshold that you say, if you meet this percentage of requirements, you're probably a good fit? What's your take on that?
I've seen those statistics. I often try to avoid generalities like this, but I just say use common sense. If a job says essential must have this degree or 5 years in this, or you're essential, you probably aren't going to get considered. But if they have a laundry list of nice to have things, and you've got, I don't know, throw a number out there, 60%, 70%. But I think a lot of people, perhaps because of the emotional turbulence, I routinely have people say, oh, this job is perfect for me. And I'll point out like two of the single most critical qualifications they don't have. And I'll say, you're probably wasting your time in a case like that. But if if common sense says you fit the general gist of the job and you have most of what they're asking for, minus any mandatory stuff, I would go for it. Sure.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I find that a lot of people in error, they get caught up in what's in the top of the job posting, where I've always felt like if you really need to see how close of a good fit you are, go towards the bottom, because that's where those must-have qualifications, it'd be really nice if you had this stuff. Like that's where that all happens, at the bottom of the posting. And I think, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I think people need to sort of understand, which is hard when you're on that side of the fence, but it's not a question of could you do the job. Many jobs, probably hundreds of people, thousands of people could do the job, but when you're dealing with the resume submission process, it's really who's the least risky to do the job. Have a lot of people, again, say, I could do that job. And I go, but that's really not what's going on here. It's a risk management exercise where some recruiter or screener is saying, who is the least risky? And the least risky often is the person with those picture perfect credentials. And they might have a little open-mindedness, but when you're dealing with published ads versus networking, I find it's, companies don't, they often have tunnel vision about that stuff.
So
just a different point of view of looking at it.
The person with the most keywords wins, and the person who's been in that role probably has more than you do, right? And so I feel like career changers have a more challenging time than the norm, even, which is already tough, of applying online. So you probably mentioned it, but is there anything else that you find that clients just sort of are gobsmacked or surprised by with this when they do start a job search?
We've talked about a few things. I think a lot of people still underestimate the process. I think the, quote unquote, good economy, at least up until recently, was, I think, people who were working just assumed that meant companies were begging for talent, or that it was a seller's market, not a buyer's market. And what I don't think they've factored in is that, in a good economy, there's every bit as much competition for most jobs, because all the employed people suddenly get the guts to come out of the woodwork and start competing as well, or start looking for a new role. So on top of that, I think a lot of people, as they get older, and I'll speak for myself as well, I think, oh, I never had a problem when I was 25 or 32, and what they're not factoring in is if it's 10 or 15 years later, they're a higher level person where there's fewer jobs, there's some age bias. So a lot of people, I think, mistakenly assume this job served the one they remember 10, 15, 20 years ago. And when they don't account for those factors, they just, kind of, I think, sort of naively get into it, thinking it's going to be easy and happen quickly, and they don't really bear down and prepare for the long haul. Just, and so I see that a lot too, just an underestimation.
No, I concur with that. They really, I feel like the term career ladder is sort of a misnomer. We're talking about a career pyramid here. And so, you're right. People higher level, there's less of those roles just by the way corporate hierarchy works. And I, like you, saw people, when I first started writing these I opened my business right around the recession, and I used to get calls really only from people that had lost their jobs. And, as the economy morphed, I got people that said, I just want to see what's out there. So there were a lot more people in there. It'll be interesting to see with coronavirus if that changes, how that might change. So I guess we'll just have to see. What drives you most nuts when it comes to, what mistakes you sort of see people making over and over again that drives you crazy?
Oh gosh, how long do we have?
Yeah, start with one.
Oh, I think every coach has their things they want to vent about. We don't always hear about all the wonderfully successful situations, but if I had to pick a few things, I think, the one, every study, every piece of advice out there tells people publish advertisements are a really tough way to get a job. Only I think the statistic I've seen, which kind of jives with my own experience, is that only 3% of submitted resumes or applications lead to an interview. And yet, for most people, the dominant strategy they try to use to get a job is just surf the web all day and just lob dozens and dozens of resumes, including for things, as we were talking, that they're just not all that qualified for on paper. So they get really frustrated. And as much as we sit there and, mention, networking and recruiters and direct company contact and all these other methods for finding work, just trying to shake people's sense that, that they shouldn't just be surfing the web all day and making that their main strategy. That should maybe be 10 or 20% of their strategy. But boy, it's hard to convince people otherwise of that.
I agree. And, spraying and praying, I did not make up that term, but I've heard it. But that, it feels like you are getting a lot done. So I get why people, they're naturally,
and it's safe, and you don't have to get out of your comfort zone and all those things. But it's a lot of work. A lot of people realize it. Yeah. So that's one. I guess another one, just to throw it in there. What was I going to say on that? I think sort of emotional intelligence in the sense of, treating others, or the golden rule, whatever you want to call it. I see a lot of people still networking, and, they're, God bless them, they're trying, but I think they're very, how do I put it? They're reaching out to people sort of demanding favors or asking, I think, in a pretty entitled way. Hey, I want a job here, or you should call me or give me some contacts. And then they're surprised when their networking doesn't work. And I think some people need to take a step back and just ask, if the roles are reversed and I was working at a company, what kinds of favor requests or inquiries would I respond to, and which ones would turn me off? So I think, some people on their networking efforts have to be a little more, polite, professional, and just a little less demanding about things.
Yeah, no, I find people are so welcoming and giving advice, but they are put off when you ask about jobs and names. Maybe unless they're your very best friends, but I agree with that. The other thing I was going to add to your previous point is that I've been looking at job. I write medical a lot in the medical device in the healthcare sales space, and I was looking at the job boards, and what I have seen, and I think this is just related to what's going on right now, is that there have been a slew of new postings targeting, medical devices and services that are designed to address what's going on with this virus. And I think in other industries, it's probably the same. So I normally do say, spend 10, 20% of your time max applying online, because the ROI is so miserable. But I do wonder if with these more urgent postings, if those roles might slip by the wayside just for the time being, because they do seem more urgent. I think
common sense. Yeah, if it makes sense that a company is, and they're advertising, they're hiring a ton. Yeah, I would think you're right. They're going to be a little more inclined to, there'll be a higher response rate and all that. But it's kind of like anything, health or diet or fitness. It's like, if you want to lose some weight, do you just go on a fad diet, eat grapefruit, do this, whatever. I think no, most professionals would tell you it's a balance. It's a smart balance of various things. And I think job hunting is the same way, but the get rich quick thing is just send, like you said, spray and pray, send a bunch of stuff out there at the expense of all these other ways you could turn up opportunities.
Right. But networking feels slower, but it really does fast track that process. We've all seen it time and time again. So what advice could you give someone who is just in the initial stages, just beginning to think about making a career move? How do you recommend they get started?
Well, I think for that kind of an issue, it all depends on the matter of degree. I mean, if you're talking about a mild career pivot, like, I was doing marketing for a consumer products company and now I want to do marketing for a consumer services company, that's not really a career change, and one could pretty much go about the job hunt in a fairly normal way. If someone is thinking of a more severe change, I want to go be a pastry chef, or I want to go from marketing to sales in a new industry. Well, that's a much bigger undertaking. And I hate to keep saying it, but I think, people should not underestimate that and really realize that retrenching for a new career, is a multi-month, some cases multi-year exercise. There's people who have paid their dues and spent 10, 20 years getting in those fields. So depending on what it is exactly, researching the field, talking to people in it, getting the training required, again, networking, being willing to take a step or two back or more to get your feet into the new industry. So I still see some people that I think, can make these massive changes without a lot of effort. And I don't see a lot of that. If it's a fairly mild pivot, though, that's not terribly difficult.
And your point about that this is not a quick journey. Making big leaps takes time. I think just level setting that.
Right.
You need to factor that in, because you might not want to wait, and then maybe that career change isn't right for you. But really understanding what it takes to be up to speed with the people that have been doing it a very long time. That's excellent.
Yeah, sometimes you'll find shortcuts. I mean, I had someone who was an ex-military person interested in teaching, and I said, hey, you got to go. First of all, I said, are you really sure you want to do teaching? Have you talked to teachers? Have you figured out what their day is like? Are you sure your notions of what being a teacher are jibe with the reality? Because I think mid-career adults really shouldn't jump into a new career lightly and just romanticize it. But as he went out there and kind of followed some of my advice on networking, he turned up, which was great. Hey, there's a shortcut. There was a troops to teachers program where he could bypass the typical 2 years or whatever it is path and get an accelerated credential. And he never would have known that if he hadn't just gone out as a research project and talked to people. So yeah, sometimes there's good news and shortcuts, but in general, making a major shift is a research project. And I will say some people who are between jobs or laid off, the first question they got to ask is this the right time? Do I have the financial and emotional resources to make a change that big, or should I stabilize for the time being and then work on it longer term?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or maybe do it as a side thing. Try to do it as a side thing.
Exactly.
You're doing your main job. Yeah. So what about, and this is maybe similar advice, I'm not sure, for someone who didn't come to you before they got started, they jumped into the job search and it is not going well. How do you recommend they regroup?
I mean, it's a lot of my days are spent, with people in that situation. Yeah. And I think you sort of sit down and diagnose. I mean, I look at this stuff in a very, I think, pragmatic kind of action biased way. So I'll sit down and kind of say, walk me through what your regimen is, what process, and we can normally, if you sort of break it down, diagnose where they're getting stuck. Is their resume have some issues? Is their LinkedIn profile not up to snuff? Are they unrealistic in their goals? But I think normally a lot of people go out and try this on their own and they wing it. And after a few months, if things aren't working, they really need to reboot. And whether talking to a career coach or just really educating themselves online, what are those more advanced methods people can use? But frequently, I find most people come in and they've just done the stuff the average person would do, a little bit of ad response, a little bit of networking. And I just tell them you got to double down or triple down and get a much more serious regimen in place. And, the old cliche, treat it like a job and measure it. And the one metric I always throw in there, I tell people, is it's a numbers game. If you're not planting at least 5 new seeds a day, we got to get you there. Because a lot of people are overanalyzing things and they'll just, make 1 or 2 contacts a day. And I frankly just don't think that's enough in most cases.
Yeah, I'm with you. You've got to sort of reverse engineer it. If I want one job, I need to have 7 interviews, which means I need to have had 18 phone screens and 27 contacts and all of that. Yeah. No, that's good advice. And you're right. There are lots of different places where a breakdown can occur, from resume to LinkedIn to interviewing, all of that. So understanding where they seem to be doing well and where they're failing can help you identify that bottleneck.
And even it's obvious, but if someone says, "Oh, I keep getting interviews, but I never get offers," well, that I think tells us all what we need to focus on. Right. Let's work on the interview skills. But you can kind of diagnose it once you really talk to people at length about what they're doing.
Yeah. Yes. No, I agree. What about and I get a lot of this, people that really, they have just a plethora of skills, and they can go in they're really they're torn between what direction they should go in. I might want to do sales. I want to do marketing. I might want to do operations. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot of folks in that boat, and who are sort of generalists. And I normally, I think it comes down to helping them clarify their worldview, in the sense of, I think people have to sort of decide in a lot of cases, do I want to be pragmatic or do I want to be idealistic? And there's perfectly, room for both. But the point is, it so much depends on a given person's situations. If, let's say, they have a working spouse who provides healthcare benefits and they're comfortable being out of work for 6 to 12 months, I might say, well, let's really aim high and be idealistic and talk about your passions, or what kind of work would you enjoy most, and think big. There are certainly many other people who, might have something they've thought about doing, but the reality of it is just either, not the right time, or wouldn't be a very prudent decision if they don't have, enough financial resources to pull it off. So a lot of times what it comes down to is I try to give them some candid feedback and look at all the stuff they've done. And I'm sure you do the same, and say, here's the stuff you've done, like it or not, that I think has the most marketability out there, where there's demand for it. There's a lot of jobs, and kind of tell them this is your path of least resistance if your goal is to get a job fairly quickly. Yeah. And if they push back on that and say, but I can't do that stuff, but I don't really like it. I'd rather work with kids and do art or whatever it might be. Well, then again, we've got to talk about the realities of, that's great. Here's what it would take to get there. Are you willing to take that plunge?
Yeah. Which one will land you the quickest, and which one will make you the happiest? And it's a balancing act. Yep, I agree. I totally agree. So you alluded to this at the beginning, but I wanted to revisit it. There's always talk about age discrimination, and that can go both ways: too old, too young. I tend to deal with the more too old concerns. And then there's also ethnicity. There's lots of different barriers to entry. How do you guide your clients, and what advice do you have for them to tackle it or overcome it?
Yeah. A lot of concern about that issue. I think all of us who have turned 40, it's sort of a sobering moment. We're like, wait a minute, I'm now in a protected class at 40. Yeah. I mean, you feel like you're at the peak of your powers.
But I want my movie
Yeah. So I've written extensively about this. My view of it, obviously age bias exists, and I think it's a big problem, since I don't think any of us have a magic wand to really fix the issue societally. We already have legislation in place for all the good it does. So I really point to people, control what you can control. And what I try to open some people up to is the reason that there's age bias, or I think that the predominant reason, is the stereotypes associated with older workers. So I'll kind of work with them on, what are they? Doesn't know how to use technology as well, won't relate well to a younger boss or take direction, health and energy issues, can they keep up, know it all, that kind of stuff. And or things like just not being up to date in their field. I mean, I still get, for example, marketing people older in life, and they'll tell me they know next to nothing about social media and think it's a fad. And I kind of go, well, I don't know if that's an age bias issue. I think that's more of somebody not, abdicating responsibility for staying current in their field.
Right. Yeah, it's a skill gap at this point. Right.
Right. And so to me, it's always, what can we do to fight back against those stereotypes? Does someone need to get caught up or and trained in their field? Do they need to update their wardrobe? Do they need even down to an exercise regimen so they project more energy and all that stuff? And on top of all of that, I sometimes point out when I'm doing interview training that a lot of these older workers, are acting like their best days are behind them, not ahead of them, and in the interview, they just tell war stories about all this great stuff they did 20 years ago and don't realize that that's not what they're being hired for. It's what they're going to do in the future. So sometimes there's just that framing issue you got to point out to people, and they kind of have this aha moment and realize that they've been reinforcing some of those stereotypes. So it's a complicated issue, but I think there are some actionable things you can work on around it.
Yeah, and even on resumes, if you run a 5K, if you those kinds of things, there's things you can allude to overcome the energy thing. Certainly, when you list technology skills, that helps to overcome the tech proficiency issues. But I hadn't thought about the idea of war stories because we tell people tell stories when you're interviews, but you do need to blend what you've done with how and sort of think through how you could apply that to this company. So you're looking at it with a forward-leaning lens, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's, and I think attention spans, I think we can all attribute this. We've seen attention spans really drop out there, and people need to get to the point. And like you were saying, talk about the future. How can I solve your problems? And I think younger people tend to make more dramatic statements about that. Like, oh gosh, bring me in 3 months, we'll have that done. It'll be great. Part of the challenge for those of us who've been around the block is we've seen a lot more, and we might be less willing to commit to something we can't back up. But I'm not sure I can get that done in 3 months. But companies are buying hope. They're looking for people that are revved up, excited, want to solve their problems. And I've seen 65-year-olds that come across, with the energy and spunk of a 30-year-old, and I've seen vice versa. I've had younger candidates who kind of had that, that other mindset. So it's partially a state of mind.
No, I agree. I actually worked with someone 3 months ago who was in his 70s, and he wanted to do a pivot. It was an easy pivot on paper, and he landed. He could run circles around me. It was amazing. Yeah. If it was aside from the picture, I would never have known his age. Different question. One of my favorites, let's say someone stops you at a dinner party and says, okay, I am going to start my job search. What are 1 or 2 tools that I absolutely need to get started? How do you answer them and then send them on their way?
Yeah, I feel, I wish I had something more interesting to say about this, because one of the, just given how long you've been doing this, I could feel I could write a book and no one would read it, but about all the tools that have come and gone since the dawn of the internet. I was teaching classes, I still remember, like, what is Google? What is email? To all these people when those things were just coming out. And then all these, precursor sites, there's hundreds of them that have come and gone in the job market. What's interesting is in the last 5 or 10 years, I think it's totally settled out, meaning there just I haven't seen many new and exciting tools come up. I think it's sort of stabilized. So again,
there hasn't been anything industry shattering or groundbreaking.
Yeah, back in the 2000 to 2010, I was writing constantly about, there's this awesome new website, or check this out. But then I think the sort of monopolies and the acquisitions and all that happened. So it's really boring, and none of your listeners are probably going to learn anything new here. But I would say the 2 must-have tools in job hunting, I would say LinkedIn is number 1, learning to use all the incredible facets of that tool for networking. The job board is good, but that's the least of its power. All the networking potential. And then as far as job boards, I would say Indeed.com is the other big one. So I think those are the two most indisputable tools. And then if I had just for fun, pick one that is not as well known. One of my favorites, and it's a really niche one, would be bestplaces.net. Have you ever used that one?
No, what is that?
It's really just good for one purpose. But if you have clients or people looking to relocate, there's this site called bestplaces.net that does extensive comparisons between cities around the country. So, it's easy to go out and say, what's the cost of living difference between Charlotte, North Carolina and Dallas, Texas? But this one gets into things like crime rates, taxes, arts communities. And so if someone's looking to move, I just think it's really slick how it allows you to just X-ray towns inside and out and really get a sense of, where might be a good place to live and how to negotiate if you're moving there.
Right. What a great resource.
Yeah.
You know what? I did just think of something new. I don't know that it helps job seekers, though. I think the verdict's still out on that. But the AI in the interviewing where they HireVue, that software that a lot of companies are using now, where they record you and then parse out what you're saying into keywords. I know a lot of my son's in college and he's interviewing with some of the big banks, or he did, and they all use that software for their internships, which was a little terrifying.
Yeah, there's so much out there, and I consider myself pretty good with technology, but at the same time, I think 98% of the stuff that's come out in the job market is not very useful, or can be just an endless time suck. So, in cautioning people that there's all these sites as seen in Forbes and the new thing, but once you really dive in and look at them, they really don't provide anything all that new or exciting, and they can just be a distraction. So. Yeah, those are just a few of my favorites. I've got others, but there's not as much new
places.
stuff.
That's great. I can't believe I haven't heard of that. So thank you. So closing it out, what is my favorite question? What is next for you? I know you wear a lot of hats.
Yeah, I don't have any grand plans. I love what I do. My days are filled with, an interesting mix of clients. And I think after, all these years of tinkering and experimenting, I've kind of got, a lifestyle and a work setup that I really enjoy. Probably, if anything, the short term is I am working more and more with new graduates and early career people. And it's just interesting to see the difference in energy and values and ideas. So I, probably going to put more and more stuff on for those audiences in addition to my traditional stuff. And someday, if I'm wrapping it up, I might put a book together, but that's still a long way out. That's a labor of love I'm not quite ready for yet.
Matt, if people want to connect with you, I have your Career Horizons website and LinkedIn listed on your on our site. Are those the two best ways to reach out to you, or is there do you have any other way that you'd like to communicate?
No, I would say my website's the main hub for kind of everything I do. I do have a lot of the advice I give is via my blog, which is all, of course, free, and it's categorized by 20, 30 different categories of career advice. But yeah, my website, career-horizons.com, is pretty comprehensive.
Wonderful. Well, Matt, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I learned a lot. I always learn something new. So very, very actionable advice.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thanks again so much for having me. And I hope everyone stays safe and sane and healthy through all the current events. And we'll hopefully see things pick up down the road here. I think all of us are in uncharted waters right now, aren't we?
Yes, your mouth to God's ears. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, take care.
You've been listening to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's SCIM online readers, hiring and decision makers, go to www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.